Kamusta kayo guys? So here we are with our latest edition of Project Pilipinas. Kamusta ka dyan, Mark?
I'm good. I'm here right now in Tarlac. Dito ko dinala ngayon ng election season. So I'm broadcasting here from a hotel room in Tarlac. Okay naman.
Good to see you, man. Good to see you. Please take care of yourself. Matulog na tayo. Puro tayo nag-message ka na. And of course, today we have another very special guest, one of the most prolific academics in the Philippines, if not the region and beyond. One of my favorite friends. Marami akong friends, pero among friends may mga mas favorite ako kasi mas masarap silang kausap. Yung iba balahura eh. Ito hindi masyadong balahura. Magaling na hindi balahura. Maraming magaling na balahura eh. Pero yung mga balahura, hindi magaling din namin fina-friends yung mga yan. So,
sino ba yung mga balahura na yan? Sino ba yan? Pangalanan mo.
Mamaya na yan. Hindi pa tayo mag-banat by style dito. Ayan. Mamaya na tayo mag-marites. Okay. Kasama po namin si Dr. Jayeel Cornelio from Ateneo de Manila University. Siya po ay chair or head of the Development Studies program, right? Diyan sa Ateneo. And most recently, meron kang bagong appointment, di ba, Jayeel?
Yes, I am incoming Associate Dean for Research and Creative Works at the That will start in June next year.
God bless you. God bless you. So meron tayong Associate Dean na rin na tayong in-interview. So hopefully soon, Dean nang tawag namin sa'yo. But obviously, you seem to be very exhausted and pushed to the limit. All right. Okay, hopefully.
Gusto ko natin sabihin sa audience natin. Diba, si Prof. Jayeel is a development studies sa Ateneo, which happens to be also the course, ang course ng yours truly.
Represent.
Graduate 2005 Ateneo de Manila Development Studies. Ayun. So yun din ang aking course. So I'm very familiar doon sa hawak-hawak ni Prof. na Jayeel. So yun yung aking kurso at ginagamit ko naman ngayon sa nation building.
Yun, talagang
some form.
Campaigner ka na. Talagang iba talaga pag sa campaign eh.
Kasama sa mga policy, tsaka sa mga mga plano sa economic development, mga ganon. So nakikiganon-ganon na din tayo.
Mark, di pa ako tapos mag-introduce kay Jayeel. 1 second lang. Balikan natin. Si Jayeel po ay isang multi-awarded academic. Among his awards actually are, wait lang, wala, pagod na rin ako. Basta I know this, okay, right off the bat. 10 outstanding young scientists in the Philippines. That is one of the awards I remember because nakita ko yan sa Facebook, and congratulations for that, Jayeel. And of course, he has done, a visiting scholarship around the region, also around the Philippines, no? In Mindanao also. Yes. So he's very much, he's not an academic who's just there in the ivory tower. No, he's very much involved with field research, and that's actually one of the things he's teaching, diba? Field work. And of course, yung kanyang postdoctoral fellowship was at Max Planck Institute for the study of religious and ethnic diversity in Göttingen in Germany. Of course, Max Planck Institute is one of the leading research institutes on earth, right? From biology to neuroscience and social sciences. So definitely we have someone of high caliber as an academic, but he's also someone who's a very conscientious scholar, a really true teacher, and someone who really cares for the country and for the youth. And all I want to say before I get teary-eyed is that I'm very glad you have stayed in the country, that you continue to inspire a new generation. And of course, I didn't say you took your PhD in National University of Singapore. So there are a lot of very smart people. They just go abroad. They don't stay around that much. I'm very glad that Jayeel is sticking around and helping a new generation and really imparting the kind of world-class training he has. So, Jayeel, I just want to say that this is very, very sincere, no? Hindi ito bola, walang shar dito. Diba? Yun lang sinasabi ko, medyo world-class talaga. Do you have any violent reaction, Jayeel, before we go into...
No, Richard, I'm very glad that you mentioned that. Because, I mean, we've had this conversation in the past, right? Back in 2016 and even much earlier. But I'm just so elated to be hearing this once again from you and to be recognized by somebody like you and Mark. You're right. It's a commitment to be here, without really antagonizing our friends and colleagues who are in other countries. But I think it's a different battle when you are here and you're writing from a position of where we are right now as Filipino scholars.
Yeah, I mean, definitely again,
scholars.
No prejudice to folks who choose to be based in leading universities around the world.
Yeah.
yeah, they're also raising the Filipino flag, no question about it.
They are, yes.
Some people should also be based here, especially in these trying times. Iba pa rin yung on the ground ka every single day, go through the grind. I just have to be fair about that, to ourselves for that matter, among others. Although, of course, we have been rotating around the world for visiting programs, among other things. So yun lang, just to be politically correct about things we said, mamaya marami na mga haters. Okay, now, as usual, what we do is first we want to know a little bit about our guest. Yes, you have been a great friend, one of my favorite friends, but I'll be honest, as I've told our other guests, I don't know much about really their background in an extensive way. Why did they choose to become what they are today? How did they arrive at the point they are today? So in this case, gusto namin maintindihan, Jayeel, what is your background? Saan ka lumaki? And what made you choose sociology and go abroad and get the training that you got?
Oh, lovely. My parents are from Bohol and Iloilo, so very Bisaya. Although I was born and raised here in Manila. And then I did, like Mark, I did my undergraduate in development studies at Ateneo. Right. But back when I was an undergraduate, Mark, back when I was an undergraduate, I already fell in love with sociology, mainly because of the introductory sociology class that I took with a professor called Minda Valencia. And while my other classmates didn't really enjoy that class, for some reason, I really fell in love with it. In fact, even to the point that when I had the chance to buy the textbook, normally, di ba, puro photocopy lang naman back when we were in college, right? When I had the chance to buy a really hard copy of the book, I decided to do that. And to this day, I still have that book with me. I think something about sociology is really inspiring. It's not just it doesn't necessarily just objectify, as maybe economics would do, to reality and try to measure everything. Sociology does measure things. We have that positivist epistemology, but there's also that part of sociology that recognizes feelings and subjective viewpoints and even the psychology of people. So in a way, to use that overused word, there is this holistic dimension to sociology as a discipline. And so later on, when I did my graduate studies abroad, I decided to pursue sociology. Religion was not on my mind, though. I really wanted to do sociology of development. Now, Mark and Richard.
You went on a scholarship, right?
I did.
Yes, you took a scholarship. Yeah.
Yeah, I did for a master's. Oh, I just took a shot. So when I graduated from Ateneo, so this was in 2003, I already took a shot at various universities around the world, and then I got in. Pero syempre, bilang fresh graduate, it wasn't very easy for me at the time to get any scholarship grant. Normally, they would expect you to have worked for 2 years or 3 years, and then you get a grant. So while I was aiming for some universities in the UK in particular, the scholarship grant was pretty. There was, but it was not as generous as I wanted it to be. And then NUS came. The opportunity came. Singapore, yeah. And they were very generous. They paid for everything: my flight, my books, my computer, my stipend, and all that. It was called the Graduate Scholarship for ASEAN Nationals. And then at the end of my master's, I was already aiming to go again to the UK. But it's just so happened that NUS, my department of sociology, which was already leading in terms of the social sciences in Asia, even back in 2005, thankfully hired or pirated this professor called Brian Turner from Cambridge, with whom I wanted to be to study, for my PhD. And then right there, lo and behold, he was already there on campus. And then he was the one who said, okay, why don't you aim for this PhD grant, which I did. And then I got the grant from the Asia Research Institute. It was because of him that I turned to religion. That was when I realized may career pala sa religion. Well,
Hindi pastor or something, right? In that
correct.
Just to be clear, because alam mo na, baka ano. So in short, alaga ka ni Lee Kuan Yew, no? So talagang alagang Singapore ang ano. Tapos dahil sa'yo, pina-extradite yung prof sa Cambridge sa Singapore, right? So you change a person's life. That makes sense a lot, no?
Correct. Salamat sa People's Action Party.
Right. Thank you to Lee Kuan Yew and our Singaporean friends for raising a great Filipino scholar. So after you took both your master's and PhD in US, right, which is now one of the 50 best schools in the world at least. How did you decide on your next step? So usually we have friends who study in Singapore, and then from there, I don't know, they just roam around or stay in Singapore at the very minimum, right? That's the tendency, because Singapore is a fun place. I mean, it's boring enough for you to focus on your work, right? Wala masyadong distraction. At malapit siya sa ibang third world countries. It's just across the water, no? Or actually across the border, may third world ka na. So in that sense, it's a perfect kind of like silo, no? For a lot of scholars. So what about you? What was your next decision after that?
Oh, what happened was I was fortunate to be on a unique PhD program. A part of my PhD was spent for 1 year at Lancaster University. So I was in the Department of Politics, Philosophy, and Religion, and I was supervised by another great sociologist of religion by the name of Linda Woodhead. And so that it was at Lancaster where I wrote my dissertation for a year. This was in 2009 to 2010. In 1 year, because I was and Lancaster is really this bucolic place in Northwest England. There's really not there's really not much to do there apart from saying hello to the cows and to the sheep, And so I really ended up just being very productive. So I finished the dissertation in about 9 or 10 months. At that time, when I was there, I was exposed to this wonderful network of sociologists. So it was really through summer schools. Sa Europe, medyo uso yung mga doctoral summer schools, and I participated in a few. And then it was because of this, in Warsaw, in Italy.
So nag-Euro tour ka.
And then, doon na tayo, syempre. Di ba Pilipino tayo,
Mark,
syempre.
yan ang gawin mo after
Ikot na ako.
Euro
travel vlogger na ako.
Vlogger ka sa Euro tour. Just in case.
At that time, hindi pa uso yun. So had I known,
sayang. Monetize yan, monetize.
Monetize. This is Rome, right? So back in the day, so I was exposed to different ways of thinking, and that was when I realized that iba talaga yung tradition of sociology of religion sa Europe, sa continental Europe, as opposed to say North America, and and like many other disciplines, whether it's political science or history. Exactly, and so I knew that
philosophy, that's
true. Diba?
Yung mga taga-continent, mga puro mga Nietzsche, Zizek, mga ganyan types. What was in the religion theme that really got your attention? Was there a specific book you read, specific experience, etc.? I mean, of course, you had the brilliant, let's say, supervisor given in, but there are many brilliant supervisors in many fields. But why religion? Dahil kulang ba yung proper study of religion sa tingin mo sa Pilipinas or sa Catholicismo or sa 21st century, sa rehiyon natin or sa Pilipinas? Was that or were you also someone very spiritual, or were you someone already oriented towards Christian spirituality? And what really made you choose religion? Because I mean, sociologists, we got a lot of great sociologists of development. My mentor, Walton Belli, among others. So I'm very familiar with that. But you were the first one I saw Sociology of Religion, and that really got my attention. And I was wondering why. And can you also tell us a little bit about your dissertation? Because just to tell you, I asked Atom about his thesis in physics. So this is how we do things, no? So he had to explain to me spectral technology. So I know it sounds geeky, but we rather know about a little bit about also your dissertation and field of research.
Thank you. I like that. I like the intimacy. For all those reasons that you mentioned, Richard, that's exactly how I fell in love with the sociology of religion. I told you that when I went to NUS, I had in mind sociology of development. Because I was an NGO worker before I became an academic, right? I wanted to understand rural communities, urban transformation, and so forth. Yeah, the usual. But it was not really so much an article that really transformed me, Richard, Mark. It was an experience. Brian Turner was my professor in sociological theory, and then he asked us to write a term paper. And sabi ko, okay, ano ba yung madaling isulat? Religion, and then internet. At that time, digital technologies was becoming really a new thing in sociological literature. And then I wrote a term paper. Simple. He liked it so much that he asked me to present it at a conference. And without realizing it, that was even invited to become part of a publication of a book. And then that became my very first publication. And that was when I realized na, huy, may career sa sociology of religion.
Star is rising. Na Lady Gaga ka. Na Lady Gaga.
Exactly.
Star is rising.
Diba? Exactly. So parang, wow, may career, no? And it was Brian Turner who mentioned that. So parang really, it's one of the things I will forever be grateful for. You know, that recognition from a man like him. Now, and then that was when, it was after having read so many things and books and articles about religion, that was when I realized na, wait a minute, maraming mga pwedeng pag-usapan sa Pilipinas about religion that are in fact being dominated by, you guessed it, theologians and philosophers.
Exactly. So we need a secular scholar in that sense, right? Not a theological scholar. Exactly. Yeah.
So the very concept of secularization, for example, are people losing their faith, right? How do we make sense of that? So when you read theologians or philosophers or yung mga local writers natin who are affiliated with the church, they would say na, oh, young people are losing religion, they're no longer pious, so they don't understand their catechism anymore, and so forth. You know, meron pa mga ideas na parang mushy ang spirituality nila, so they get attracted to mega churches with all these feel-good forms of Christianity. I knew that something was wrong with these accusations or with these assessments. Kasi nga, I mean, sociologists naman tayo, we can already put ourselves in the shoes of these young people. And wait a minute, maybe that's not really the case. And that was when I realized that, in fact, when I was growing up, I already sensed that something was different with my generation. So in the end,
millennial, right? Just to be
clear. Oh, that's another thing we can talk about, no? Kasi personally, I reject all these Western labels, no? Yung mga millennial, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, no?
Western pala yan. Age is Western. It's like, gusto ko yan. Numbers are Western. I'm kidding. Go ahead, please.
Science is Western, you know. Anyway, so that was when I realized na maybe I should try to understand the Filipino youth. So in the end, I wrote a dissertation that aligns with the sociology of religion as much as it does with the sociology of youth. Kasi simple lang naman ang tanong ko doon, and this answers your question, you know, ano yung ginawa ko for my dissertation. What does it mean to be Catholic to Filipino youth?
Right.
So this was about more than 10 years ago. So simple lang yung tanong ko. I went around interviewing young people. This was in Metro Manila, and I had a simple question for them. What does it mean to be Catholic to you? And that was how the dissertation was formed, was written, and eventually it became a book published in 2016 by Routledge. Right. So malaking bagay yun. Now for the first time, there's a really good social, I would say good, no? Maganda naman yung reviews, no? Good social scientific work on the state of Filipino youth religiosity. Now, I approach it from a social scientific perspective, bracketing away all my judgments, no? Theological or religious judgments. Now, oh, young people are not religious anymore, and they're not praying enough anymore. But when you talk to young people, that's when you realize that no. It's really, religion is evolving, right? Kaya ano siya? Kaya I developed.
Mark, meron ka bang tanong dyan?
Evolving in what way? Yeah. What were the findings that you found really interesting? In what way is it evolving?
No, I'm sorry. Did you ask how it is evolving, young people?
Right. Religious attitudes among others, right?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. Sorry, I mean the battery went off just now. So sorry.
Hopefully the sound is good enough for our audience. But please go ahead.
Yeah. So this is so how is it evolving? The idea is that you've got young people now who are at least nasa research ko, who do not necessarily practice yung mga traditional forms of piety, going to mass on a weekly basis, going to confession on a regular basis, activities that we normally associate with religiosity. You are religious if you go to mass on a regular basis. With these young people, and even statistics would actually support this claim. No? This is my other project right now as we speak. I'm looking at statistical data and we're realizing that there are really generational differences now. In any case, sa research ko noon, wala pa akong quantitative data, qualitative lang, and I was already picking up these ideas. No? Namely that, for many young people, and maybe some of our audience could resonate with this, I don't have to go to church in order to prove my Catholicism and or to be sincere about my faith. And then tinanong ko, syempre, ano bang mahalaga para sa iyo? And then I discovered there are several nuances. And to me, what the most important realization, and this is in the book, was this: right living is more important than right believing. Right living is more important than right believing. So you have a lot of young people who would say, I don't really know what the Apostles' Creed says. I don't really know what the Catholic teaching says about this or about that. But to me, the most important thing, and young people would say this, is that I know how to express my love for other people. I know how to express my concern for other people. And that's how Richard, Mark, and that's how I discovered that. That's how I could make sense now of why young people are participative in humanitarian work, in philanthropic work, in a lot of advocacies that they might be passionate about. I think we cannot necessarily detach that from their spirituality, whether or not they are conscious about it. But if you go deep in a conversation with them, you will find that these values of concern for other people, social justice, and so forth, it's there. It's there.
So
and you probe it deeper.
Embodied spirituality, or ethics of action, right? I mean, if you go back to Judaism, that was very much, both Islam and Judaism very much focus on that, right? I think that's the point of departure a little bit with Christianity, whereby, especially in Protestant Christianity and all that, it's accepting the grace, right? It's more or less enough, right? While if you look at Judaism and Islam and other monotheistic religion, actions are also very important for them, right? Aside from, cognitive spirituality, etc. So maybe the post-institutionalized religiosity or spirituality of the youth is kind of also going back to that roots, probably, no? The older Jewish tradition or approach to spirituality.
Sa akin kasi, from a sociology of religion perspective, it really has to do with what we might consider to be the late modern condition, using Anthony Giddens and
late capitalism in that sense.
Late capitalism, if you even Ulrich Beck, yung risk society niya. The whole idea is that you've got societies around the world are increasingly individualized, in the words of Anthony Giddens, you have no choice but to choose because there are so many options. And I think that's what the spiritual condition is right now. I don't necessarily buy into the postmodern relativism thing, because that's not what we're picking up, as if values have become so relativized. It's not. It's really that young people are making a choice now. Okay, I don't care about going to church on a regular basis, but I do care about justice. I do care about seeing that my faith makes sense in social issues or social, and that's why you've got a lot of young people now who are involved in organizations, in advocacies. It's not just so much about idealism, but it's also about that, the search for authenticity. Authenticity, at least from a Charles Taylor perspective, about the ethics of authenticity.
Where do you think the influences came from? Karen Armstrong, these kinds of writers. I read them, and very much I can see their version of Christianity and spirituality, or Buddhism, Westernized Buddhism, is very much the things you're saying, right? You think they're influenced by that, or maybe listening to opera or those kinds of thought leaders, right, who tend to emphasize this kind of non-institutionalized religion, but more about ethics of everyday action. Where does this points of influence come from? Because obviously it's not happening in a vacuum, right?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. It's not really Deepak Chopra or Oprah. It's not really that. I think
Deepak Chopra. Yeah. Okay. All right. Maybe they are responding to these trend lines. That's why they do very well. Billionaire na si Oprah. I think Deepak Chopra might not be far away. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's very North American, or maybe you can say global North, no? These are the patterns there, kasi really what happens in terms of the religious landscape in the West, no? Really, the institution loses its authenticity or its authority, no? Ang tawag namin doon sa sociology ay detraditionalization.
Right.
The traditional sources of authority, namely the external, the structures, the institution, the church, right, or the religious leaders, they're no longer relevant. So what matters to the spirituality of at least a Western experience or Western religiosity is the self, no? The self being the arbiter of what is true, what is authentic. So ang tawag doon ay detraditionalization, and in layman's terms, no, spirituality and so forth, what feels true inside. Do you find the traces of these developments and these patterns among our young people? To be sure, no, to be sure, but it's not really via Oprah or via these alternative forms.
Right. Oprah or Chopra, right? Yeah.
Correct. Actually, there's a book that's titled like that, no? From Chopra to Oprah or something like that.
Plato to
So,
Nathan.
the question lang din. So if yung the younger generation now, so if 2010, probably mga younger millennials, so won't that affect yung future ng church? How will that affect yung Catholicism as a whole? For example, in the Philippines, what if yung future generations of Catholics hindi na nag-a-attend ng church? So
right.
Yeah. A brilliant question. Magaling yung tanong na yun. Parang, are we seeing a generational shift right now which will determine the kinds of religiosities in the next generations to come? Brilliant question. The sociologist would temper himself or herself, no? Hindi siya magpe-predict kasi there may be countercultural movements or there may be revivalist movements along the way, say 20 years from now, that could again change the pattern. Pero if we look at the patterns of religious change in again the global north, say Western Europe and then North America, you can always trace it back to a certain decade, and this is really after the war, no? 1940s, 1950s. You can see the shift, no? As their economies grew, religiosity started to decline.
Right.
And that generation was no longer religiously socialized as, say, their grandparents or their parents were. So think of Queen Elizabeth, diba? Queen Elizabeth embodies that very pious and traditional individual, right? Pero that's really during the war and then certainly before the war. Pero after the war, makikita natin na people at the time became less and less religious, and that's why Richard and Mark, diba, yung the hippie movement, these were the baby boomers, right? So by the time that they became teenagers in the 1960s and so forth, they were already anti-religion. So what would they pass on to the next generation in terms of religion? Nothing. Or a very different kind of spirituality, right? Medyo most postmodern. And so that explains Richard and Mark, yung sinasabi kanina ni Richard, the rise of alternative spiritualities, westernized forms of Buddhism, more practice-oriented Hinduism, yoga, and so forth. You find that certainly in many parts of North America and certainly in Western Europe. So to answer your question, Mark, this is why I am doing what I am doing as a sociologist. I really think we are at a crossroads in terms of shifts, in terms of values and religious attitudes. My next book, maybe I should say this now para committed na ako, really is about documenting the state of religion in the Philippines, in Philippine society right now and how it is changing. I feel that 50 years or 60 years down the road, this book is going to be the reference point. No? Oh, back in 2020, this was how Jayeel Cornelio documented the shifting attitudes towards the religious institution, towards religious practice, and even hot button issues: same-sex marriage, gender equality, homosexuality, LGBT pride, divorce. Did I mention that already? Yeah, and so forth. No, makikita natin watershed moment, for example. In particular, was the reproductive health bill debates in 2013. Yeah. So makikita natin na parang you've got, diba? And tayo yun, right? We were right in the middle of that one way or another. So the RH bill, I think is a watershed moment in the sense na parang, okay, finally the church doesn't have the final say when it comes to sexual morality. And then the rest will follow, no?
Yeah.
Divorce and so forth. I am documenting this now in terms of the generational statistical data. I'm working with a young sociologist on this matter, and hopefully we get to publish our results very, very soon.
Right.
So, therefore, kung ito yung values ng mga generation ngayon, young people today, who are going to be young adults tomorrow, what values are they going to pass on to their children? Certainly the values that they're embracing right now.
Correct.
And then that's how you see religious change. Therefore, from a sociological perspective, religious change doesn't happen overnight. Religious change is about intergenerational change. It takes long durée to understand religious change.
Correct. Oh, can I make this a little bit more intimate, because this is not what we usually do in our podcast, because let's talk about us, right? Medyo the older millennials or whatever, however you want to put it. How do we approach spirituality? I'm a little bit curious with two of you, and of course I can tell about myself later. And like ikaw, Mark, and ikaw, Jayeel, for instance, what is your relationship with religion, or do you even have a relationship with religion that you're comfortable to talk about? Ikaw, Jayeel, for instance. I mean, I know there's a sociologist mind in you. You try to approach this in an objective way, but at the same time, I'm sure there's the non-scientific, right, religious side in you, right? I won't call it non-scientific, the parallel cognition, right, that approaches spirituality in a different way, right? We have multiple faculties of cognition. How do you reconcile that? Is there tension between them? I don't want to go to Immanuel Kant and all of that, right? But just ikaw, like, how do you approach religiosity? What kind of relationship have you had with organized religion? And also ikaw, siguro Mark, pag-usapan din natin in terms of religiosity, etc. Like, I'll just tell you, like in my case, my when I was very young, my dad got sick, right? So he had brain tumor and he had to go through very difficult operation, right? And it had a lifelong effect on him. And so from a very young age, spirituality was a refuge for us. I mean, I don't know how I could have got through all those traumatic and difficult experiences if I didn't have some spiritual foundations. Kaya nung nag-UP ako, I was very shocked by the anti-religious. Talagang grabe, kasi nung nasa Baguio ako, every lunchtime nasa Catholic church ako. Yung church sa Baguio, doon ako nagba-break. I'll go there, I'll pray, and then go. As in, ganun ako. Sobrang good boy ako. You know what I'm saying? I was that type of guy. And then I come to UP Diliman. My goodness, right? They're bashing religion, etc. So it took me some time to find a new equilibrium in terms of my own personal spirituality. But I can honestly say, I don't think if I hadn't had that kind of spiritual foundations, I could have survived through very, very difficult and traumatic moments in life, through and through. So, I mean, I'm just getting the ball rolling. What about you guys? Because let's study ourselves, right? What is our version of spirituality? Ikaw, Jayeel, at saka ikaw, Mark, if you have no choice, you have to answer, right? This is what this podcast is all about, right? Yeah.
Ako muna siguro.
Yes, Mark, please go ahead. Tell me about yourself then, kasi never natin pinag-usapan.
Never din
please tell me. I'm curious.
Good topic. I grew up Catholic.
Right.
Tapos nung college, I converted to I became a born again Christian.
Yes, born again, yeah.
So I go to CCF, Christ Commission Fellowship. Hindi na ako masyadong nakakated recently. But when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I would have discipleship groups,
right?
And lahat ng activities dun sa church, I was active also.
Right.
So yeah, I don't it doesn't show much ngayon.
Actually, Mark, you know what? I don't want to patronize you, but magaan ang loob ko sa'yo. That's the reason why we work together on this, right? Jayeel knows I'm a very individualistic guy. I just work on my, I mean, I love my country and everything, but I really work alone, right? I live alone, I work alone. So Mark, you're the only person I've been able to work for more than a month.
Thank you.
So, I mean, magaan ang loob ko sa'yo, and every friend of mine who gets to know about our project is, ang bait naman nung kasama mo, including my mom, who's also born again, right? So I'm not patronizing, I'm just being I'm very honest about this. So maybe I can see now where is this coming from. Medyo magaan eh.
That helped me form as a person when I was in my college days and growing up. It doesn't show much ngayon. I mean yung pagiging born again Christian ko. No, because iba yung persona ko online. Iba yung persona ko online. And pero parang I don't get to attend my church that much, but it's still my home. I still consider it my spiritual home. So I still want to if I could have more time, I want to go back and do yung things that I used to do before. So yun yung akin.
Mark, can you tell us why? But ka nag-born again? Is it a family decision? Was there a certain person who came and
I'm the only
converted
one
you?
in my family. I'm the only one in my family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a funny story. It started with a girl. Yeah, meron akong malaking crush dun sa girl na yun.
That's one way. That's one way.
Yeah, really effective. Gets me all the time. Anyway, she invited me. Tapos, she's the daughter ng pastor, ng main pastor of the church.
Right.
Tapos yun,
okay.
I never left na. You know. Because I became friends with a lot of the people there. And
right. Parang parable, no? First you get in not for the best reasons, and then once you're in, you get drenched in the spiritual wisdom.
Yeah.
At that time I was
at that time I was 15, 16.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah, I was really young.
Wow.
I entered college in Ateneo. I was 15 eh.
Wow.
So I was really young. So parang it helped me a lot during those formative years in college.
This is very thank you for your honesty. I mean, I can tell more about myself, but I don't want to make this about myself. What about you, Jayeel? Because you know, one thing I realized, we never talk about religion among ourselves. A lot of our friends are atheists. I don't know if you are. I don't sense you're an atheist, but we have a lot of atheist friends who are very. I don't want to talk to them about religion because they're gonna say some things I'm not gonna like, and then if I respond, they're gonna call me what, Taliban or something like that. You know, I don't want to go down that line. You know me, like I'm very. It's like, you know, and there are many people who are shocked to know suddenly about my spiritual side, right? All these books I'm reading actually on biographies of the Prophet, of Buddha, and Reza Aslan, Karen Armstrong. I really love their work. They really help to fill in the gaps sometimes when, you know, I alone cannot do it. But what about you? I mean, we talk about sociology of religion together, or the political implications of that, which, by the way, we'll go on later on because that will be the meat of our discussion too. But I want to know more about you, if you're comfortable to talk about your own spirituality and your own relationship with institutionalized religion, right? Throughout your very young years. It's like, let's just put it that way. Yeah.
Let me just say that I'm really enjoying this conversation. Kasi I was really prepared to talk about religion and politics, and now here we are talking about intimate details about our lives. No,
that's why I love this podcast. That's why it's more, man.
No, brilliant. I really appreciate this. I hope our audience will appreciate this as well. So anyway, and I think many of our listeners, or people who are watching us right now can resonate with this. Kasi kay Mark, di ba, conversion. Tapos sa'yo, spirituality, Richard. Sa akin din, conversion, but the story doesn't end there. So I grew up Catholic. I wanted to become a sacristan, an altar boy, and then there was an intervention somehow. When I went to Iloilo, I became exposed to the church of my cousins, and then became a born-again Christian myself when I was at 12 years old. So just before I was a teenager. And then I grew up in an evangelical church, charismatic evangelical church. I think Mark could resonate with this. And then I grew up in that environment, conservative, hands down. And that's the kind of Christianity that we have anyway in the Philippines. Whatever religious group that you belong to, chances are it is conservative. It was only much later in life when I became increasingly progressive. It was graduate school. Back when I was a master's student, I was reading, basic texts in Sociology of Religion, Durkheim, Max Weber, na parang talking about explaining religion from a very sociological perspective. And that was when I started asking myself, does God really exist? No? So there I was, keyboardist in our mega church, very evangelical. But I had questions that nobody could answer because I was the only PhD student in our church. Everybody else was an OFW na parang, no, maniwala ka na lang, just believe, have faith. Diba? That's not good enough for
faith. That's where the guard would put it, yeah.
Exactly, So anyway, it was that experience that really made me, go asking questions about theology and about religion and science and so forth. So I really devoured all these texts. And then that was when I became also very interested in different denominations. So I was adopted by a Singaporean family, so I would go to a Methodist church with them. And then I fell in love with Anglicanism, diba? Neither here nor there, not Roman Catholic, not Protestant either, very middle, very, via media, very
third way. Yeah.
midway. And then I studied in the UK. I became part of a local Anglican parish. That was when I started getting myself exposed to different theological strands, and that was when I fell in love with liberal theology, progressive theology, right? Questioning yung mga evangelical and Catholic positions on natural theology, complementarianism, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, yung mga ganong klaseng doctrines and teachings that we normally hear from a very conservative pastor, for example. Now, I can really confidently say that I am evangelical, but I'm a very progressive slant. In fact, history would show that evangelicalism was a very progressive movement back in the 19th century when it first emerged in North America. It was not really a religion of middle class, upper class, raise your hands and praise the Lord and just spiritualize everything. Hindi, it was really a religion of social justice.
Right.
I feel that I am going back to the roots of at least progressive evangelicalism, and that's the kind of religious advocacy that I have right now. Now you're talking to me and I'm talking to you as a sociologist of religion, Mark, Richard, but in reality, the publics that I am more engaged with is the faith community. I interact with colleagues from seminaries as diverse as the Union Theological Seminary in Cavite, very, very pro-LGBTQ, and then the more progressive colleagues sa Asian Theological Seminary, and certainly Catholic seminarians and Catholic priests as well, having taught sa St. Vincent School of Theology of Adamson, mas progressive din, mas social justice din. This, in other words, that is a very long discussion of my spirituality. Pero I think my journey.
Not at all. I mean, I'm curious. I'm enjoying. I love hearing your side also, because I want to hear you, Jayeel, talking about religion, not Jay as a sociologist talking about religion.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So I think I have become increasingly convinced over the past few years since Duterte became president that a lot of Christians are asking the same questions that I used to ask.
Right.
Only that they don't know whom to ask.
Right.
So, for example, back in 2018, 2019, we published this widely read article on Christianity and the War on Drugs. Megachurch Christianity and the War on Drugs. That's one of my most downloaded articles on my website, widely read even by megachurch pastors. Really, I think irking them. And that's what we do as sociologists, no? But because of those articles, I've got so many people messaging me, strangers, who say, thank you so much, Dr. Cornelio, for talking about this, writing about this.
Right.
You see, these are questions that we are not allowed to ask. And every time we raise our hand and ask about politics in our church, parang we are being silenced. We are asked to just tone down and to put down all our posts on Facebook about this. I think my personal story, this is a little presumptuous to say, but maybe a lot of people could resonate with this. My story resonates with the story of many people. Essentially, what I discovered in my book. So in a way, parang foreshadowing yung book ko, yung dissertation ko, which became a book. Little did I realize now when I was interviewing.
Sorry, for the benefit of our audience, can you say again the title of your dissertation turned book?
Okay, the title of the book is Being Catholic in the Contemporary Philippines, Young People Reinterpreting Religion.
Right.
Being Catholic in the Contemporary Philippines. Yeah. When you Google it, you will readily find it, no? Or the introduction is downloadable on my website, so you don't have to buy a copy. So long story short, diba, sabi ko kanina, yung mga kabataan na nakausap ko, many of them are really into social justice. Right living is more important than right believing. In a way, parang I could resonate with that. There is a whole theology backing that up, no? Yung the social justice and progressive values and theologies that I think we need today in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
because so much bigotry, so much fundamentalism is to be found in our politics.
Right.
And you have so many influential Christians, pastors and priests even, who are using the scriptures to say that, hey, the war on drugs is biblical. Hey, divorce, we should not allow that. Hey, LGBT, they are sinners. But that's only one strand of theological thinking. I feel that there's a lot that we could do to deepen the conversation.
Or using forgiveness, to kind of try to gloss over the sins and questions of accountability. And I cite, the book of Proverbs, he who justifies wickedness and condemns the righteous, right, are both abominable to the Lord, right? So actually I had to go back to Bible and also that I can be able to be conversant in their language. Because what I don't like usually is what happens is that people are trained in social sciences, have this kind of yabang from a scientific point of view, so they don't engage. And then the other side, they have a different kind of yabang, some of them, which is this kind of a moral superiority. But I think we have to engage each other. And I think in my case, I'm not a sociologist, political science is my background, but I try to engage through the language of the Bible itself and properly understanding that, right? And in your case, the reason I like your work on religion is that I don't sense it has that social science yabang. It actually comes from a Christian heart talking to fellow Christians through the language of sociology. And that's what I think makes you quite special, at least in the Philippine context, in terms of your examination, interrogation of these issues. And that's where I think you occupy a very special place in the country.
Thank you, Brother Richard. I really appreciate all of that. Yes.
Yeah.
I was trained well, diba? I did part of my PhD at Lancaster. So I was supervised by Linda Woodhead, who happens to be both a sociologist and a theologian.
Right. Interesting.
And the Church of England hates her, or at least the bishops, no? The bishops hate her because she's the sociologist who uses data and then, uses it as a mirror on the Church of England. Parang, hey, wake up, you're hiding this abuse.
Recibo agad. Yeah.
Exactly, you're talking about this, but nobody listens to you. That orientation, I got it from her, and I carry it with me here. And then one very important lesson that I got from her, I would never forget, is this: you got to speak their language, Jayeel. You got to speak their language.
That's what I'm saying. You have to speak the language, right? Exactly.
That's what you're saying too, Richard, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I feel.
Sorry, mahabang day natin. What's her name again? Let me Google her. What's her name again?
Linda Woodhead. Linda Woodhead. I'll type it for you.
Sige, text mo sa i-double check yan. I'm sorry, I really like this. I really love this discussion. I was expecting we'll go straight to Tatay Digong and all of that, but I felt we have to go through this because I think, I won't say shallow in discussion, but for me, kapos yan, because I really want to understand. Like now, I like Mark even more. I understanding where spiritually comes from. I think it's in our moment of relative vulnerability and honesty that we can actually have even more profound intellectual conversations. Otherwise, it's payabangan pataasan ng kilay, diba?
Thank you for saying that.
And that's why I really appreciate and thank you for being open, because in some of our other podcasts also we had friends who suddenly open up on some very personal issues, right? After discussing surveys and politics among other things. So thank you very much, Jayeel, for engaging us on this level of discussion. And thanks, Mark, by we also being open about this. Siguro the next time we can all go to and pray together and all of that, which is not what I see that much among fellow millennials. In fact, one of my friends, I said, let's go to church and pray together. And I could see he was like surprised to see me, in front of candle and everything like that. That's the last thing they can, Richard Haydarian is this guy, on Facebook and CNN, whatever. But that's why I really wanted you to be here on our show. But before we go to the politics part, which is, I think, what you really expected, and I think, Mark, marami kang materials dyan. What about the notion of liberation theology, right? Within Catholicism also, you had very progressive strands. Some would say Pope Francis was somehow influenced by that. And you can see that reflected in some of his relatively progressive positions on climate change and other issues. Can you tell us about that? Because, of course, you're not Catholic anymore, but this is what I tell to some of our friends who converted, but don't seem to appreciate the other side, that side of Catholicism, which is liberation theology, and the very important role it had in places like Latin America, right? In very difficult times during military juntas and dictatorship and everything like that. So for me, I mean, that's something that I always try to go back to: liberation theology and Catholicism. What is your take on that? Can you enlighten us on that issue from your studies?
Liberation theology is an inspiration to progressive evangelicals.
Right.
In many ways, people like myself, progressive evangelicals like myself, envy the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church has a very strong Catholic social teaching tradition, right? Which is still, evident to this day, at least from the more recent writings of Pope Francis and many other local scholars here in the Philippines, by the way. Siguro the only lamentation I have about liberation theology is that it has been overshadowed by the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel is what you find in many churches today.
I mean, Americans invented that, right? I mean, this is the thing. Everyone says religion is on the downside, but you go to America, it's on the upside. And yet, if you analyze it, it's that form of religiosity which has been gaining ground in America. I think historians like Neil Ferguson have done a good analysis of that, among others. But can you tell us about that? Because yung argument na pababaing religion, you don't see that in Middle America. You don't see that in Deep South, right? Actually, it's on the rise. And my goodness, all these millionaire pastors you see there, it seems to be actually on the upward trajectory. And now you see in Nigeria, they have these huge universities, among others, in the Philippines, among others. Can you tell us about that? Yeah. So from liberation theology to prosperity.
It's prosperity Christianity or the prosperity gospel is the religion of the aspirational middle class.
Right.
And you find that in every in societies like Singapore or certainly the Philippines and many in the aspirational Christian Indonesians, certainly in Nigeria.
Right.
You go wherever you've got this growing middle class population, then you find the prosperity gospel emerging. Certainly in the Philippines, really, we can trace it all the way back to El Shaddai and Brother Mike Velarde, among urban poor Filipinos, for whom the promise of upward mobility and the blessing of God was really a very compelling message. But I think over time in the Philippines, nag-evolve na siya from a message for urban poor people to an elite, to an elite form of gospel that you find in charismatic preachers like Bo Sanchez. And I've got a recent piece on this. I paid attention to both Sanchez and then Chinky Tan, for a more evangelical flavor. But there are many other charismatic and evangelical preachers, even in local congregations, small congregations, who embrace the prosperity gospel, even if they may not necessarily admit that what they're preaching is the prosperity gospel. Mahirap naman kasing aminin na prosperity preacher.
I mean, this is essentially what the Protestant ethic of Max Weber was all about, right? This emphasis on prosperity and earth as a sign of, and then of course building social capital, among other things. And his analysis was that's why capitalism does very well in countries that are majority Protestant, England, Germany, so on and so forth, America.
No, the only thing with Max Weber, though, with the Protestant ethic, is that you are not allowed to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Kaya siya maririin.
Delayed gratification. Yeah, yung concept.
Delayed gratification or no gratification at all, kasi that's not part of your calling. Your calling is to work, right? So prosperity gospel, it flips it on its head.
Interesting.
God wants you to be rich. God wants to bless you.
And enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Exactly, right? So if you want a BMW, name it and claim it, brother. Kind of thing, right? So it's a very unique movement. It's not really new, kasi you can trace it back to yung mga positive thinking, diba? Positive thinking of the 20th century, and then certainly it melded with Pentecostalism, the belief in just confessing. So yung positive thought movement at saka Pentecostalism, they got married to each other, and then what do you have? The prosperity gospel, which is very influential around the world. I think in the Philippines, that has become far more appealing from the 1980s until today. And this is also the same time that liberation theology waned. Liberation theology was strong in the time of Ferdinand Marcos, 1960s, certainly 1970s.
Resistance to tyranny, social justice, community solidarity, grassroots. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. And the problem of poverty, inclusive poverty, right? There's no hope beyond where we are right now. But post 1986, with neoliberalism and globalization, the marketization of our Philippine society, Fidel Ramos and so forth, right? Exposure to APEC, World Trade Organization, and so forth, the global migration. You've got an aspirational, upwardly mobile, middle class Filipinos, precarious, yes, but upwardly aspirational anyway, right? They will not be drawn to liberation theology, right?
Wala rin tyrant Wala rin tyrant junta. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
The kind of monster is no longer there, right? So
exactly.
It's a different attitude. Yeah.
The monster has become so individualized.
Right.
Kapag pinanganak kang mahirap, hindi mo kasalanan. Pag namatay kang mahirap, kasalanan mo pa. Oh, that's neoliberal. That's neoliberalism, right? Individualizing responsibility for upward mobility, for social stability. And that's what prosperity gospel teaches.
Exactly. So in short, these religious attitudes have not emerged in a vacuum. They actually interact with broader productive forces, broader ideological discourses, etc. So I think that's a very important thing, and that's what I love about sociology. When you look at the intersection and confluence of these factors, right? Hindi yan chara, totoo yan.
May tanong lang ako sa prosperity gospel.
Yeah, balik tayo sa'yo, Mark. Go.
Is it only with Protestant churches? Para sa Catholic, meron bang equivalent nung ganon? Kasi sa US, you see the mega churches, you will be blessed, ganito, pastor buys a private jet, ganon. Is it with Protestant churches lang, or sa Catholic ba meron din ganung form?
Both churches, the feast, right? Si Bo Sanchez, God wants you to be happy, right? God wants to give you a bright hope. And then would quote Jeremiah 29:11. The feast, right? The feast, and everything. What my colleague and I did, si Aaron Medina, in our study, what we did was we did the content analysis, Mark, of many of the books written by Bo Sanchez about prosperity. Di ba marami siyang mga libro about becoming rich and so forth. And then he infuses his message with a lot of inspirational words and so forth. And that becomes really the message that he also delivers before the members of the feast and so forth. So yeah, you can say that, no? But of course, ang predecessor ni Bo Sanchez within the Catholic Church was Brother Mike Velarde, 1980s, right? So in fact, you can even argue, Mark, that before prosperity gospel became entrenched in evangelical or Pentecostal or charismatic Christianity in the Philippines, it first emerged in Catholicism.
Pero yung kala Brother Bo at kala Brother Mike, hindi sila yung official. Hindi sila, di ba? Kasi unlike, di ba? Parang they're outside lang, hindi yung official na parang people from the Catholic Church mismo. So yun yung difference ba? Parang ganon? So, di ba pag sa mega churches, yung mga pastors
they're not part of the hierarchy, parang ganun.
Oh, they're not part of the hierarchy Pero they serve.
Freelancer sila, ganun. Oo.
From a sociological perspective kasi, Mark, we're less interested in the institution Kasi di ba nobody listens to the institution naman. Nobody listens to the elite, di ba? To the religious hierarchy. Right? Sino ba mas influential? Di ba si Bo Sanchez ang mas influential? So from a sociological, perspective, mas pinakikinggan talaga yung taong very charismatic. So therefore, it's not so much about whether he or she occupies a very important place in the hierarchy, but it's really the charisma. No? Sa sociology, charisma is very important kasi para all the appeal of a preacher emanates from this perception that he or she has the anointing of God. And di ba sa prosperity gospel, God wants you to be rich. And if you're rich, the anointing of God must be upon you. Right? So, and then I want to be like you. I want to be like him. Or I want to be like her. So yung charismatic leadership nun is far more influential than say the role of a bishop, di ba? The bishop na mapapakinggan mo lang sa on a Sunday mass, no? for example.
So this is Jeremiah 51:39, diba? I mean, just to be clear about this, no, just to read it. In their excitement, I will prepare their feast. I will make them drunk that they may rejoice and sleep a perpetual sleep and not awake. So definitely there's a kind of an emphasis on, give joy and feast and all of that, right? Which is very much in tune with the kind of, I won't say ideology, but the messaging that is coming out that you were mentioning a while ago. Just to be clear about this. So mahalaga talaga yan, no? Yes. Okay. So now let's transition to the politics part. So magsisimula pa lang tayo. I hope that folks got to know a little bit about you and us and why we really care genuinely about this topic. Na hindi lang tick the box lang. Now let's go to the past 6 years, because many people would say, well, on one hand, they would say this is a moment whereby someone is coming here to purge, right? To purge the country out of corruption and evil and all of that. We know who are these people, right? But there are other people who are on the other side said, my goodness, this is a moral crisis. This is a human rights catastrophe. How can people remain quiet or silent? And if fear is the issue, how come kids in Thailand, in Myanmar are risking their lives for freedom and all? Where are the people? Where is the outrage? Where is the outrage at tens of thousands of alleged extrajudicial killings, etc.? So how do you interrogate this debate? Because you see two diametrically opposed language. One is language of cleansing and purge, using religious rhetoric. And the other side, both secular and religious, also saying, oh my goodness, what is this, right? This is a plague, right? This is a plague that has really upended the country, and it's a moral crisis that not enough people are outraged by what's happening. How do you approach this debate as a sociologist and also as a person, as a human being? I mean, I'll just be honest. There were nights that, I would just cry because I would just feel completely helpless. Like I cannot do anything. Whatever I do, there are things happening out there. And the least I could do is not to condone it or not to say anything in an effect that tries to rationalize it. That's the only best thing I could do. And that helplessness was really a moment of moral reckoning for me, right? I would just say. So it took me some time to work my way through that and keep enough sanity and, to just do my job and find fulfillment and spiritual meaning in that. But going back to you, I want to understand also where you come from and how you approach this very, very wrenching moment in our history.
It is, and it will continue to be. The war on drugs, Duterte's war on drugs, surfaced in a very clear fashion the two moral logics at play in our society. Ulitin ko. The war on drugs surfaced in a very clear fashion the two moral logics, ways of thinking in our society. On the one hand, you've got the human rights people, right? Human dignity, right? Which interestingly became the minority. It used to be the main discourse, at least post-1986, diba? Human rights, freedom of the press, human dignity, rule of law.
The sacredness of human life. Exactly.
Human life, exactly, right? And maybe up until 2015, if you want to know, when Pope Francis came, it was all about mercy and compassion.
Right.
But the war on drugs surfaced in broad daylight. The other moral logic at play, which had been there, interestingly, as literature would show, which we just didn't know of previously, the safety of my family, the safety of my community, the security of my life as a person who tries to lead a decent life will trump the life of a criminal. Is far more important than the life of a criminal. The work of Wataru Kosaka, an anthropologist, is very useful in this regard. He's not a sociologist of religion, but in his work, in many of his writings, he shows that the support for the war on drugs is the public support is precisely there because people in his ethnographies, people are trying to lead decent lives. They want to go to work safe, not getting mugged along the way. They want to come back home safe, not getting mugged, bringing their pasalubong to their families, to their children. The criminal, as this emblematic figure that obviously became really the big enemy in Duterte's rhetoric.
Boogeyman, yeah.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
exactly. Was the identified enemy. That which threatens my attempt to lead a decent life. It's a very different moral logic.
Yes, yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's really about well, it was your choice to be a criminal. Sorry ka. Dapat mamatay ka. Kasi kung di ka mamamatay, paano naman yung mga anak ko?
Pagka Sodom and Gomorrah, di ba? Like, wala eh. Unrepentant, they have to be cleansed, you know? I mean, that's exactly how I see it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why you have many priests and pastors, and again, this is from another research that I conducted with Aaron and Iya Maranyon, Aaron Medina and Iya Maranyon sa Development Studies sa Ateneo. We realized that so many pastors and Catholic priests, by the way, would be invoking these verses. Classic would be yung don't throw your pearls before swine. Diba, there's that parable, right? You see Jesus who mentioned that. Simply saying na parang, no, I mean, these criminals are pigs, they're swine, and they will not appreciate whatever you give them. Kasi something has already happened in their brains, and it has
Matthew
been destroyed.
7. Yeah, it's in Matthew.
Yeah, almost hopeless.
Right.
And then there are some pastors who would say, no. Duterte is God's anointed. Hear me out. Duterte is God's anointed. He is like King Josiah in one of our interviews. He is like King Josiah in the Old Testament. King Josiah was this king who removed all the idols in Judah. And that was really, the Bible describes to be a righteous period in the time in the Old Testament. And Duterte is likened to King Josiah for cleansing Philippine society of its social ills. It's a very different moral logic. Diba? Very different dun sa naririnig natin.
I suppose they cite Leviticus too, I suppose. You know, I mean, there are a lot of passages in Leviticus that could justify all sorts of, you know, very minimal, you know, like, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we can already come up with we can in fact come up with an entire book, you know,
how to glossary of their, you know, exactly. I mean, I'm just
what makes exactly twisting the text, parang gano'n, no? And of course, ang pinakamatindi dyan yung Romans 13:1, you know, God has granted the government with the authority, right, of the sword, and so therefore we must obey those in authority. This is so common, especially among fundamentalists, evangelicals, Protestants. So if Duterte is president, it's only because God placed him there to be our president. So let's not complain, let's just obey. And this is the kind of theological thinking that you find among many Filipinos, you know, and then marry that with the idea na parang, well, we're leading decent lives, these people were given a chance. Sorry, if they don't man up, then they suffer the consequences. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword, and all that moral logic that we find there, precisely because there are people who are trying to lead decent lives. So magkaiba talaga yon. So every time that you have bishops who say human rights, human dignity, rule of law, that just goes over and above people's heads. Ano natin yung human rights if my children would be killed at night as they're walking back home. Diba? And no less than the president himself echoes exactly that moral logic. Richard, Mark, diba? Na parang, don't touch my children, I will kill you. You can actually use the Bible to support that.
Yeah. And
the Bible has indeed been used to justify that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of violence you can see against other communities there in some of the, you know, Old Testament, etc. But before I go to the next question, because this is where I think political science can be also helpful, because one issue that doesn't address is, but how do you know someone is really a criminal? So that brings you to the issue of due process, and then by extension, lack of confidence in due process, and then by extension, what we call penal populism, right? Nicole has written on that. I have done some work on that. But before I go there, I want to understand also where Mark is coming from. Ikaw, Mark, I know you're in a political campaign involved now, so maybe you want to be safe about some of the things you want to say. But I mean, if whatever you want to share, sorry for saying that. I'm not trying to prejudge, but I'm just trying to say I care about you. And I understand your dilemma. But ikaw, Mark, anong tingin mo dun sa drug war at saka yung mga religious debates around that? Because ikaw, Mark, ikaw kasi you have your ear to the ground eh. You know, I mean, a lot of us are here in our workshops and webinars and academic conference. Ikaw andyan ka eh. You're in the bazaar of ideas. I don't even call it, you know, agora. You're in the bazaar of ideas online, on YouTube. My goodness, anyone can comment. All sorts of prejudices and all are very pellucidly transparent there, right? Ikaw, anong intindi mo, Mark, over the past 4, 5, 6 years? Yung attitudes ng people sa drug war and reaction or lack thereof, no, vis-a-vis yung extrajudicial killing issue. Anong basa mo, no? Given that, of course, you also have a background in social sciences. Ikaw, anong basa mo? As someone who's big vlogger and very much involved in everyday bazaar conversations, yeah.
I think it goes back dun sa ano eh. Nung sa naging topic natin last week nga, yung frustration sa justice system
with
sa
Attorney
bansa.
Starr, yes, exactly, yeah.
Oo.
Yeah.
Yung ako medyo nagtataka din eh. Parang religion got lost somewhere along the way eh. Parang they know it's bad, they know it's wrong, they know that killing someone is wrong. Pero it serves them eh. Mawawala yung siga sa barangay namin eh. Mawawala yung pusher doon sa ano namin eh. So hindi ko pa din siya exactly mapag-connect.
Right.
Kasi there are two types of supporters dun sa Tokhang and all that eh. There are some who are in denial na wala namang AJK, wala namang ano. So those are parang mga different kinds of apologists. Pero there are people who would acknowledge it, say that it exists, nag-exist siya, pero wala tayong magagawa eh, nandiyan na yan eh, ginawa na yan eh. Yeah. Parang the end justifies the means eh.
Yeah.
So,
parang collateral damage given na yan, parang ganun na lang tingin nila, yeah.
So in the whole debate about it, parang nawala na yung sa religion eh. I think this is a good topic then to open with the Prof. The administration did a really good job of demonizing yung institutions such as yung media and even the Catholic Church, diba? To the extent na parang when priests would say na masama pumatay, masama a lot of people would even, diba, contradict them or sabihin nila, ba't kayo ganito.
Pro-drug lord kayo. Parang ganun. Sabihin nila, ikaw, kasi supporter kayo ng mga drug lords at oligarchs. Ayun ang sasabihin nila eh. Yeah.
Or i-bring up yung mga issues with abuses dun sa ilang priests, diba? So parang the administration did a really good job of parang yun nga, demonizing nga is the exact word eh. Yung
right.
Na hindi na sila na parang walang bigat masyado yung kanilang what they have to say. Yeah. And it shows, and kung tinan mo yung popularity rating, di ba? Taas pa rin for whatever no. So yun eh. So hindi ko siya mapagtugma din eh. Masyado eh na for people na
ano yun lang kita, sorry. You know, Isko said he's going to continue the drug war. I mean, you're not the official spokesman, but maybe you can help these to be clarified. But at the same time, Isko, you know, I know from our conversations with him and throughout time, sabi niya he's also going to uphold rights, diba? I mean, because Isko always talks about, you know, God first, family man. So his approach is very different from President Duterte. At the same time, he says he's going to continue drug war. Can you explain that a little bit to us? What's going on there?
Yeah, he has been very clear since taking office in 2019. Parang he exerted effort in saying na every time na he would catch a criminal na dealing dun sa illegal substance, he would always say, yan, buhay yan, buhay hindi siya
Hindi ako, yeah, exactly. I mean,
yeah, may extra effort in trying to differentiate yung
himself.
war, yung war ni president and
from his version.
From his version.
Mm.
So I'm sure narinig din niya yung mga nangyari before. Kasi it happened in everyone's lalo na sa sariling backyard, diba, sa tondo and so on. Diba? May mga nangyari pero yun na nga.
Right. I mean, ako just going back to this. I mean, my understanding goes back to, you know, Jesus going against the Pharisees, right? Ito yung mga priests who were essentially speaking the language of power, right? By, you know, so ako ganun ang tingin ko lang sa mga ibang tao, no? Na use religious language to justify oppression. They're the very Pharisees that Jesus was going against. That's why I love Jesus Christ, because in a way he was really a revolutionary against an oppressive system. So for me, yun din ang understanding. That's how I approach this from a personal moral standpoint. Pero ikaw, born again ka, bro. Of course, similar to my mom and of course to Jayeel and all. From spiritual internal, let's put aside politics and surveys and all. Ikaw, paano mo na-approach yung issue na yan? Did it create some moments of parang like what's going on here? I mean, how did you reconcile that with some of your convictions as a born-again Christian with what's happening in the country?
I think kung meron if ever meron man na part sa akin na syempre tumutol dyan. And of course, wala namang born-again Christian who would call themselves true born-again Christian who would be for killing someone else, di ba?
Without due process, yeah.
Yun. So I think that part of me parang happened in 2015 and 2016. Before Duterte won. So after Duterte won, you become more of a realist na. So what do you do now? What will happen now? Diba? He has he's still 6 years in power. So more on realist na. So I guess ganun yung transition na nangyari sa akin.
Andito na. It's a matter of dealing with it. Ikaw, Jayeel, when Duterte was coming out during election and saying all of those things, you know, patabayin namin yung mga isda dyan sa Pasig, etc. What was going on in your mind as a sociologist, also in your heart as a Christian, right? And then how did you reconcile yourself emotionally and spiritually with what's happening around you? Again, I don't want to undermine your scholastic objectivity here, but I just want to have this honest conversation with you, because I don't think we're having enough of fun. We're all doing our political analysis here, but that's not enough for me. I want us have to have a proper spiritual conversation about this, because ang laki nito eh. This is gonna stay with many people throughout their lives. Babalikan itong issue na ito eh. So I want to understand, Jayeel, how have you been approaching this issue from the days of the campaign to once it really started, the killing was happening, you're seeing it on TV, my goodness. I mean, children dying. I mean, this is, and then I go abroad, of course, I'm always abroad explaining, and they ask me, and like, how can I explain this without making my people look bad, you know? And then at the same time, without justifying, you know how hard it is. I saw some of my interviews and parang naawa ko sarili ko. I was like, how can I explain this? So I use terms like Asian values, right? Which is exactly what you were saying, like the Singaporean model, community, safety, beyond individual rights. But of course, I didn't agree with it, but I just had to use it as a framework that the international audience could appreciate, right? You know what I'm saying? But for me, it really traumatic. As in, grabe. I mean, the past 5 years have been great. Forget about the trolling. I mean, just the moral dilemmas and questions that rose were really challenging for me. Ikaw, Jayeel, can you tell us a little bit about your take on these issues and what you have been going through over the past 5-6 years?
I guess I was a naive observer, 2015 to 2016. I will not deny that. I thought Duterte would lose because his message was too brutal. And then when he won,
this is too crazy. Si Leloy din, medyo dismissive din siya kay Duterte. Yeah.
When he won,
right.
Again, the naive me thought that, maybe it was all rhetoric, it was just to win the day, diba? Parang jet ski, that kind of thing, right? Until the first murders, started appearing in the headlines, and then the numbers just keep piling up. That was, and then it had the popular support of the public? That's an important question that every sociologist needs to answer. And I'm sure political analysts have attempted to explain that very well. Some of them in a very clear and penal populism, as you have rightly mentioned, for example, is one. But ako kasi, sociology of religion. So I see, okay, where do values come in?
Right.
No, where do values come in?
Right.
When I embarked on interviews in 2017, so that was 2017, 2018, a year or two after the start of the war on drugs. I was just interested in how religious groups in Payatas were responding. At the back of my mind, I was expecting that churches would be doing something to take care of the victims, the left behind families. But in the course of our interviews, Richard, Mark, Aaron, and I realized, now wait a minute, why is it that these pastors are so supportive? Or if not supportive, they'd rather just keep quiet about this.
Why?
That was when we realized.
Let's just be honest. Those days were scary, right? I mean, just a motorbike passing, I would have a knee-jerk reaction, to be honest. I don't know what you were going through, but nakakatakot yung first years of Duterte. I mean, to be totally honest.
Interesting kasi dun sa mga interviews namin, is like, yun nga, ginamit yung mga Bible verses to say na parang, these are sinners and they therefore have to face the consequences of their sin. In our research, we discovered two nuances. One nuance, one strand of thinking, and this was the majority thinking, was that drug addicts are sinners, and so therefore they have to face the consequences of their sin. And so they would talk about, yung church namin, ninakawan kami ng mga drug addict. Yung dito sa community namin, may mga pinatay ang mga drug addict. So laging ganun, the crime, the sin, the moral panic, over drug users, right? Pero meron kaming minority strand na narinig din from some other priests and pastors. They did never use the word sinner. They would always describe drug users as victims of structural injustice, victims of poverty, and victims ultimately of the state. And these churches were more sympathetic, to the left behind families, raising funds to support the education of the children and so forth. We did not see any of that from the other faction. Yung isang faction, in fact, one pastor that we interviewed even drew up a list of drug users in his community and helped the local police to visit the houses of these people. So doon pa lang may makakita ka na parang, okay, the support for the war on drugs is not only political, or it's not only about security. Sure, it's about security, it's about politics, it's about safety, but there's also that moral dimension. That was when I think I had this conviction that I could not just be a sociologist documenting these things. That was when I discovered the power of public theology, engaging the faith community, even though I'm wearing the hat of a sociologist. I wasn't really doing that before, so implicitly I was, but it was only in the past 6 years that I took this to heart. And that's why ibang level talaga. Like yung recent piece ko, yung recent Rappler piece ko, it was directed to the Christians voting for Bongbong Marcos. Deliberately, I was showing na, wait a minute.
Okay, let's talk about that. Can you tell us about that? Because this is a big issue, di ba, Mark? Pag-usapan natin ang mga Marcoses, right? The man of the hour of the weeks and the months probably to come, right? Kamusta? Okay, so how are we from a sociological and religious sociological standpoint, religious discourse standpoint, no? How are we gonna approach this issue of the Marcoses? And of course, this is close to my heart because my region, the North, Baguio, Ilocos, this is where we have very interesting conversations about Marcos. At etong Christmas, tignan natin sa Baguio, anong magiging debate dyan. Because, it's a very divisive issue, actually. Particularly Bongbong Marcos himself, not even Marcos as much, it's the son. It's like, is he even as good as his dad? But anyways, let's not go. Can we go back to this issue of the Marcoses and the religious discourse, the discursive dynamics, and also the moral questions and debates there?
forgiveness, the theology of forgiveness, a misplaced theology of forgiveness, right? Forgiveness and moving on. Obviously, we hear that from the pastors and the priests, right? The pastors, certainly. But obviously, we hear that also from Marcos himself or the Marcoses, right? Na, let's move on, no? Dapat hindi tayo nagkakaroon ng galit sa bawat isa. These are really very powerful rhetoric statements, ha? Na parang any Filipino would fall for that. Oo nga naman, dapat magpatawad tayo, di ba? Kaya nga tayo nanonood na maalaala mo kaya kasi naiiyak tayo sa mga pagpapatawad.
So yung pobre na drug addict, patayin, walang forgiveness, pero yung nagnakaw ng billions, forgive natin yan. Parang, I'm just trying to understand, you know? Yeah, I'm just being honest because I do that. I throw it back at them, very Socratic. It's like, wait lang, di ba, yun ba ang sinasabi mo dyan? Parang gano'n. Yeah, just to be brutally honest.
If we assume Christian morality to be coherent, then we will have a problem. If we assume that people's moralities are always coherent and consistent and they do not crisscross, they do not go wayward somehow, then we will always have this problem. But the sociologists of religion will see morality to be a hierarchy, right? And negotiated. Moralities are always negotiated on the ground. Kaya nga, people would say,
may tactical,
situational.
Yeah.
Situational, navigational, contextual, right? Kaya nga marami namang, people would say that cheating is a crime or cheating is wrong, pero they would be the first to bribe, right? In order to get their license, driver's license,
or
right?
nakatatlong Pfizer na siya. I mean, my goodness, like people like bragging about their vaccines and all online. I mean, it's the most insensitive thing I've ever seen. I mean, I never posted anything about vaccine or anything like that. I mean, anyways, let's go back. Doon mo makita yung feudalistic mindset talaga. Feudal talaga eh. But anyways, going back to what you were saying, yeah. On the Marcos.
Also, certain sins are pardonable and other sins are not. Right?
Yeah.
Right? Pag nagnakaw, parang okay lang. Pero kapag rape, hindi. Kapag murder, generally hindi. Pero kung ang pinatay naman ay criminal, pwede. Right? Kung may mga namatay sa Tacloban, ito yung hierarchies of misery, di ba, ni Nicole Corato, right? Pwede tayong maawa doon sa mga pinatay mga namatay sa Yolanda, pero hindi tayo maaawa doon sa mga pinatay ng war on drugs, ng Tokham, right? So certain lives deserve our agony, no? Our lamentation. Certain lives, certain deaths deserve our celebration.
Conditional sympathy or conditional compassion, right? In that sense, yeah.
Conditional compassion, you might put it that way, or hierarchical talaga, na parang certain lives are disposable, right? And so the job, I think, a good public theology must recognize that there are these hierarchies of acceptable deaths,
right,
or acceptable sins. So kung ang framing lang natin ay huwag kang papatay, period, it would go over and above people's heads. Right? Pero kung ang framing mo would be yung mga napabayaang pamilya, yung mga pagiging biktima ng drug lords, you change the conversation altogether, away from the drug user to the structures that are out there. Pero mahirap kasi yun eh. Kaya nga sa penal populism, di ba, very simplistic solutions, kill the criminal, right? And that appeals to a lot of people.
Right,
and that appeals to the moral sensibilities of people na certain deaths nga are acceptable. So kapag ganun, ang understanding natin of how morality plays on the ground, then it's not so much the problem is not so much with the inconsistency, but why certain deaths are acceptable and others are not.
Ako kasi I was thinking maybe you can connect again this to this kind of feudalistic class tensions issue and all, because I don't know, Noam Chomsky had a very interesting term that stuck with me, the term na champions of the strong, right? So usually we talk about champions of the weak, champions of the poor, etc., right? But there are many people, there are cultures whereby you have champions of the strong. Like people want to be with the strong people, right? People want to celebrate this. So if you're rich and powerful, you're blessed, you're good. So a part of me sometimes feel that maybe this negotiation of this incoherent, stance on murder and all, like, or forgiveness, like, pag pag medyo mayaman ka and you made it there at naging presidente ka, you know, it's like, there's even more sympathy for those persons. Like, look at it, like, when the president is not feeling well, yung level lang, kawawa naman si tatay, etc. Even yung critics ni Pangulong Duterte, it's like, parang nakakawa naman siya, parang wag na siya magsalita. I mean, but you don't see that when like a family of a drug victim is talking and he can, and wala siyang communicative competence, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, so you have the communicative competence, you have the class issue, you have the power issue. So I think this kind of feed in to these hierarchies of conditional, compassionate positionality, right? Parang ako, that's how I understand it, how power and class come into the picture. And I'm somehow also influenced by the work of Vicente Rafael, who just came up with a great work called Sovereign Trickster. So I did a review of that. So I went back to all my Foucault there, right? I had to go back to that because yung analysis of Vicente Rafael is that, look at Duterte. He's at once a joker, and then he's also like the killer and monster and all, right? And he can pull that off at the same time. That's the magic of what he does, no? Sabi nga ni Lord De Vera sa amin ni Mark noon, di ba, Lord? Di ba sinabi ni Mark, na alam mo, sinabi niya, paano mo naman isatar yung tao na mas gago, mas kaya na magpatawa ng sarili niya than you? I mean, he can easily preempt, you know? But what the other thing that really got my attention with Vicente Rafael's approach, because he's an historian, is if you look at it, the Philippines has been a traumatized nation from the very beginning. The way the Spanish build yung state building and nation building process natin. Look at the essentially civil war that happened in Mindanao afterward. Look at how our warlords and dynasties treat our people. Look at how our people are mistreated when they're abroad as OFWs. So when Duterte comes in and kind of promises a moment of, you know what I'm saying, like you get, you know, so in that sense, he becomes a symbol of emancipation in a very strange way, right? When he violates everything that you think is a red line. So people say like, because I remember once, Jayeel, and like, you know, I had people comment, because, you know, I do work with Al Jazeera, with some of the Middle Eastern based, and then some OFW respondents, and someone messaged something in one of my interviews, something like that. Gusto ko kaya ni Pangulong Duterte, even when you don't agree, because you can go there internationally and, you know, dominate it, right? Like you show strength on the international level. So, minura ni Duterte. So you create you create a sense of empowerment for us, because in our daily life, we face all sorts of, you know, hierarchies of oppression, anxiety, and trauma, etc. I'm just trying to connect that because I think all of these elements are very much connected in how people negotiate their value systems, right? That this is not just an internal process, but also an internalization of power structures out there. And also this history of traumatic nation building, state building. And I think Duterte instinctively knows these fault lines, and he knows where to put his finger on that. And that's where his Machiavellian skills come into the picture. I don't know. I kind of agree with some of the analysis that Vicente does there. But anyways, this is the political scientist in me approaching this from a historical standpoint. But I just wanted to also take your point on this.
It makes sense. Everything you said makes sense. Precisely because, and again, this is where the Sociology of Religion hat comes in.
Exactly.
Yung idea nga that you've got Duterte, who has been anointed by God to defend the plight of the poor. Right? Remember when he was campaigning, diba, na parang he would talk about the long lines at every MRT station. He would talk about people queuing from early morning just to get their passports, diba? So he was really a champion of the poor, but of a very specific kind of poor. The hardworking poor.
The law-abiding citizen, right? I think that's the term.
The decent poor. Yun yung kay Wataru.
The LACs, right? Law-abiding citizen.
Right? Exactly. So kaya si Paolo Afatato, in he's a Vatican-based journalist, he's a friend, colleague of mine. He wrote in one of his pieces, you know, and based on his interviews with locals, na apparently Duterte is seen as the avenger, God's avenger, right? The one who fights. Exactly, the one who fights for us against criminal elements that are destroying the very integrity of the lives that we lead. I think yun yung kailangan ma-confront ng public theology of every faith community. Unfortunately, and going back to Bongbong Marcos, we're dismissing all of that again in the name of one, the glorious past, the imagined glorious past of
Talano
the 1960s.
Talano. Talano. Yamashita Gold. Yes. Favorite ni Mark yan eh. Taas ng views eh pag ganyan ang comments namin. Sige, go. Talano.
All right, in the name of the imagined glorious past, or the imagined in the name of national discipline. Sa kauunlad ng bayan, disiplina ang kailangan. Many Filipinos would buy that.
Yeah, that term really,
Discipline. They would buy that. So you cannot detach that from the hierarchies of values that we have. I'm not blaming Filipinos per se, okay? Don't get me wrong.
We're trying to just understand the dynamic.
Pero hindi ba, no? Parang I see it na, parang yung religion comes last eh. Parang you choose muna what you want. I want to support Duterte. Then you figure out a way na lang. Retroactive eh. How religion will... It's the same way eh. If I choose Lenny, if I choose Isko, if I choose Pacquiao,
right?
Diba? Parang it's just used na lang to to try to justify whatever yung kung ano yung decision to begin with. Parang ganun minsan yung nangyayari.
Ang counter-argument dyan ng isang sociologist of religion ay, why of all possible options, you decide to choose this and justify it using theology or using
why make the effort? Why did make the effort decide? Exactly. I see what you're saying. Okay, that's an interesting approach.
People have decided to make that effort means that religion is still up there. It's there in the consciousness.
Maybe not number one, but maybe I see.
And we cannot deny this. The Philippines is arguably the most religious society in the world. Walang atheist sa Pilipinas. Kung meron man, we don't know who they are. Or maybe they're in very small circles. And
umalis na.
Umalis na.
Yeah.
Right? Also very religious in terms of practice and in terms of belief in the Bible, in terms and even homophobia, in spite of all this talk that we are the most gender welcoming, gender equal society in Southeast Asia. Pero may mga ganun pa rin eh.
Yeah.
And I think this is why I feel na parang if we say religion is not important in politics, then we're really dismissing the role of religion behind Manny Pacquiao. We're dismissing the role of every Catholic priest celebrating the Mass where Bongbong Marcos shows up. We're dismissing the role of every pastor laying his hands upon the candidate. Or for that matter, Iglesia ni Cristo. Huh?
Yeah,
diba?
May tayong sinabi, si Pastor Kibuloy na lang eh.
Oh, exactly.
Magpangalan ng pangalan eh.
What do you think about the religious churches? Now, parang they are expanding into mainstream media. Some of the biggest new mainstream media outlets now are owned by the big churches in the Philippines, like UNTV, SMNI, Net25.
It's part of another. In my other writings, I describe this as part of their performance. Performance, right? You don't want to be called a religion of the poor. Iglesia ni Cristo began as a religion of the poor in 1914 among the working class of Manila, right? But in the course of the 20th century, it amassed so much wealth. That's why it was able to build all these neo-Gothic churches around the country and around the world, creating, organizing humanitarian work, diba? And even coming up with this television programs and television stations. What do they all mean? Right? It's a demonstration that they have arrived. No, whether it's Sunshine, right, a very awkward name, or INCTV, or Eagle Broadcasting, or UNTV. It's not only because they want to proselytize. Now that's the standard interpretation. They're using this to convert people, right? But it's also a demonstration of their power. Personally, I like watching UNTV and all these programs kasi they give me a very different worldview, Weltanschauung, in German, right? Right? A very different worldview, right? That gives me an understanding Okay, maybe this is exactly how the members of Kibuloy think. Right? Kaya, so pag hindi ko yun naintindihan, I would simply be judging them and simply saying, you're brainwashed, therefore bobo, therefore they don't think for themselves and so forth. So anyway, that was a very long answer to your question, Mark, pero that's important. That's part and parcel of their influence building, not just locally, but internationally.
That's very, very interesting. Okay, going back again dito sa, let's go to the issue of populism, because one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of these new populists, no, whether it's Bolsonaro, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Orban, right? And then of course, Erdogan on the other side, etc. All of them appeal to religion in one way or another, to notions of the patriarch, the notion of tradition, the notion of homogeneity. Duterte, it's interesting because he kind of is very close also to a lot of these evangelist groups, right? And even when he makes seemingly atheistic or anti-Christian statements, he actually tries to put a caveat and say it's because the true Christianity is not this and this and that. You know what I'm saying? So he's actually, he circuitously makes an argument that he's actually the more faithful guy, right? And we see when he was in Israel, he was very respectful, right, towards the religious, monuments there in Israel, and also definitely he's not an atheist in any sense of the word in that sense, right? So what is this? Is because kanina pinag-usapan natin itong issue ng parang post-institutionalized religion, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, when we know historically, when things go tough, in moments of war, or now with climate change and all of this uncertainty, you tend to also have millenarian and revivalist phenomenon, right? And my sense is that the rise of these authoritarian figures is one of the manifestations of revivalism, not overtly religious, but I mean, just look at QAnon, right? Which is now has as many followers as major religions in the US, and it spread like fire. I mean, 2 years ago, you would say, what? Now it's like, my God, look at the Pew surveys and all. And I mean, it's essentially the argument is essentially Trump is like really the anointed guy to save us from all these Democrats who are pedophiles and all. Like that's the QAnon stuff, right? And it works. It's insane, right? So for me, it's not in a way, for me, it's a kind of a double movement, right? So while you have this kind of post-institutionalized religion trend lines, especially with younger generation, you're also having this kind of the other side, like the return of the father, of the patriarch, etc., right? So I don't know. I mean, this is where I see it from a political science standpoint, but I want to understand how you understand this form of populism, because populism has many versions. I called Isko polite populist and Jokowi polite populist, for instance. But you also have this very authoritarian populism with some religious undertones or overtones in some cases.
Gosh, where do we begin?
I know, but this is like a really, it's a deep topic. I think we really have to understand it from a sociology of religion perspective, not only political science, not only economics, etc.
Alam mo, my work on religion with respect to authoritarian regimes and Duterte and all that really shows that we cannot discount the power of religion, beliefs, theology in galvanizing right-wing politics. So obviously, we've seen that in Donald Trump and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Christian nationalism. In my work in the Philippines, I have begun embarking on this. No, I have a different concept. I call it theological nationalism. But the whole idea is that the moment you treat the Philippines to be a Christian nation, diba, Mark, Richard, we always hear that. No, the Philippines is a Christian nation.
Which is compared to what? How many million Muslim brothers and sisters we have and others, right? I mean, they're close to 8 million, 9 million. I mean, again, but anyways, that tells us about how problematic our nation building project is. We tend to forget not everyone is Christian. But anyways, going back.
Exactly. Exactly the point. And my previous work in the past 2 years was really about unpacking what exactly this means. Some people might think that this is just about the fiestas and the Christmas and the holidays and the Holy Week and the people crucifying themselves in Pampanga, diba? That's part of our Christian identity.
Sure. Sure.
But I think it's also, I think it also feeds into this whole idea that because we are a Christian nation, we cannot allow evil in the form of certain policies. For example, gender equality. Kaya nga yung SOGI, hirap na hirap, di ba? Right? Or divorce. Certainly same-sex marriage will never see the light of the day in this country, not in the next few decades.
Bakit?
Precisely.
Tell us about that, because I think Mexico, almost all Catholic countries are moving in a direction a little bit ahead of the Philippines from a liberal standpoint, right? On divorce, for instance.
Yeah.
At least on divorce, right? I think even Mexico is moving. So why is it that even compared to fellow Catholic Hispanic background countries, the Philippines is parang red lines are still red lines. I'm trying to understand the Filipino exceptionalism. I think on this, I agree we are exceptional. Not on the traffic and all other issues. Go to Mumbai, India. Tell me about traffic there. But anyways, let's go back. Yes, this is interesting. We even have an exceptionalism among Catholic brethren, right? So can you explain that to me, please?
Yeah, maybe because I don't even think about the Latin American Philippine connection. And I think we should, you're right about that. But I don't even to me, in terms of religiosity, Latin America is not our counterpart. In terms of religiosity, our counterpart might be Nigeria, Ghana, right? All African societies where you have a very strong fundamentalist voice in politics. And for that reason alone, we can compare ourselves even to South Korea, where fundamentalism is very strong in politics also. To a certain extent, maybe Singapore, but that's debatable. But the point I'm making is this: the moment you treat, what I'm saying is that to consider the Philippines as a Christian nation is not a neutral description.
Yes.
It is very normative through and through. Number one, you're dismissing the fact that there are non-Christians around. The Lumad, and certainly the Moro, right? The Muslims, right? In Bangsamoro, right? And because we consider ourselves to be a Christian nation, then they are an aberration. And then you have to treat them in a special fashion and so forth. So again, which feeds into their social exclusion all the more. Okay, but the other thing I wanted to say is that the moment you treat yung discourse that the Philippines is a Christian nation is also a morally loaded discourse.
Right.
It's conservative. It's not a liberal form of Christianity. It's conservative. And why is that? Is it because is it because we are an aberration in terms of our Catholicity, dito sa Pilipinas? That might be it, That might be it. But I think it also has to do with the theological imports, Richard, Mark, the pastors focusing, for example, on evangelicals, right? Focusing on the Pentecostals and the charismatics here. Right. What kinds of books do our pastors read? Mm-hmm. They read books written by white American evangelicals of a very strong conservative bent, right? Without any consciousness of critical race theory, without any consciousness of gender inequality or class injustices and so forth. Bakit? Kasi the most important thing is that we convert one another, we convert people, we bring them to Jesus Christ, we ask people to confess that Jesus is our Lord and Savior. I will not refute the validity of that theological claim, but I will question the political blindness, right? Yeah. That pervades this theological discourses that we directly import from North American counterparts. We can really trace this, the global connections. We can really do a transnational network analysis of these churches and the connections.
It's not a West versus East, because, sorry to cut you that, because in feminism, for instance, there's a lot of debate. Oh, this is like white women feminism doesn't apply in our country. You get what I'm saying? Because I see a lot of that discussion when we discuss about women's rights and feminism. And, as someone who, dated women from Western background and feminist background, like, And then I share some of the thoughts with women in other contexts, in developing contexts. Like they give you a laughter. It's like, oh, that's like white people's feminine. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, because so, but I think what's being forgotten is these transnational networks, right? This flows and ebbs and of these ideas, that it's really hard to draw the line, like developing versus developed, west, north, south, etc. Right?
Oo. Yeah. Oo. In fact, baka nga hindi useful yan eh. Hindi useful yan eh. Kasi, I do have theologian
not
friends who
on
celebrate
feminism per se. I'm gonna get bashed. So I'm just saying. But I'm just saying, like, I generally have this kind of I'm not very comfortable with this East versus West kind of arguments, because how does it make sense in a world of extreme digital connectivity, right? Which is so easy to transmit, you know, not to mention easy travel, at least before pandemic, right? Yeah, you were saying, go back. Sorry, I had to cut you there because yun lang, the transnationality, I think, was very important element to discuss. Transnationality.
The bottom line here, I feel, Richard and Mark, is that the theological space, the theological conversations are very, very narrow. They're very narrowly framed. No, they're always articulated in a conservative fashion, whether in the form of the complementarian theology. Oh, I really have a problem with that, right? Male and female, and God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. You know, so without familiarity
I
with
do the car or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So the whole gamut, right? And I feel that there's a lot that needs to be done with respect to widening the theological space, right? Queer theology, feminist theology, class-conscious theology, and so forth.
Right.
But if the only theology, or if the only movement that really shapes Christianity today is the prosperity gospel, for example, then that's it. You will not have any sense of social justice, right? Unless you're exposed to the small communities of progressive Christians, whether Catholic or otherwise.
Yeah. Mark, do you have a question there? Alam ko, Mark, pagod ka na. I see your effort. You're my hero, Mark. You are my hero. Jayeel, can you tell us a little bit more about this liberal Christianity you have been mentioning? Because liberal Islam is something I've been studying for quite some time. It's a big topic now, especially with the rise of fundamentalism and all of this Talibanization, and also liberal Islam is a big topic. We know about Reform Judaism, right? The non-Orthodox branches, but liberal Christianity, I'll be honest, it's not something I keep on hearing or reading about, right? Because Christianity is presupposed to be essentially the precursor of Renaissance and liberalism and all, right? I mean, that's the implication, right? That Christian civilization created modern democracy, etc. That you know what I'm saying? Like, so when I hear the word liberal Christianity, right? Can you tell us more about that? Who are the figures behind it? What are the key tenets of that? How powerful is this movement? Is this something for the new generation? Like the new generation can more relate to? A little bit about that, yeah. You can evangelize now if you want, in that sense.
Yeah, without really simplifying everything. But okay, we've got this conservative Christianity, and we know conservative Christianity to be a very literalist,
right?
To always have a literalist reading of the Bible, and which translates into the way Christians understand sex, gender, politics, family life, and social order. No, essentially with very hegemonic, patriarchal, masculine, and even right wing. You know, you can argue it that way. Now, liberal Christianity, really, it goes all the way back to what, 19th century, even earlier, as a result of advancements in historical criticism, reading the Bible not as a word of God. Certainly in Germany, you know, this really emerged in that country, in theological circles in Germany back in the 19th century or earlier. The whole idea, because of historical criticism, they were approaching the Bible not as a word of God that could be understood in a literal fashion, but as a historically conditioned text. And therefore, one needs to understand what the genre is of a specific book and why it was written for a particular audience, to whom it was written, and the whole thing, the whole gamut, right? When it comes to trying to understand the Bible as a historical text. But of course, the moment you approach the Bible in that fashion, then all the mystery and the myths and the miracles are also historicized and are also the facts, the facticity,
The more
right?
contextualized approach to the religion, it was said in this context. So like Za Aslan and Karen Armstrong's, this kind of popular writers writing about Christianity, can you identify them as liberal Christians in that sense? Like, this is what Jesus meant because this was the political context in Judea in that time, etc.
Certainly Karen Armstrong. Diba? Karen Armstrong used to be a nun and then eventually became very postmodern and so forth. No, si Reza naman is Muslim but of a more progressive position as well.
Yeah. So anyway, actually converted to Christianity for a while, then he reconverted back to Shiaism.
Oh, did he? Okay, yeah. Okay. And he's explored. So anyway, so the point is that when with liberal Christianity, you become less rigid with your interpretation of the Bible, as if there's only one way of interpreting the Bible. And this liberalism in Christianity permits the individual to approach it from multiple angles, from the point of view of queer experience, from the point of view of racial injustice, and so forth. Ang problema lang doon, Richard and Mark, ang problema lang doon is that your conservative evangelicals or conservative Christians would be up in arms. Sasabihin nila, that's no longer biblical, that's no longer consistent with what Jesus preaches, and so on and so forth. Pero the response of the liberal viewpoint is that even the Jesus that we might subscribe to today is really a construct that was not there if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, right? And so forth. And we know naman that I know that many people out there will consider me heretical for saying this, but in reality,
one second, Mark, may tao sa likod mo suddenly. I'm sorry, na-distract ako. Are you okay there? I'm sorry. Nakita ko yung reaction ni Jayeel. I'm sorry, Lord. I mean, this is very... Biglang may tao sa likod mo kanina. Like, what's going on here? Anyway, maano ka Cesar Montano ka. I mean, anyways, going back. Sorry, Lord. Going back to that, because this is, okay, I see. Because I mean, I'm looking at also like William James' varieties of religious experience. Isn't that a form of liberalization of religious discourse, etc.? I don't know. I mean, I'm just looking at that because...
Yes, William James is a psychologist, from the 19th century, 20th century. So parang what he did was really he just documented different religious experiences and approaches.
Right. Now there's no one version of spirituality per se. There's no one correct way, but essentially there are thousands of ways to get to Jerusalem, etc. That's the message he was sending. But going back
into that,
right.
So even liberal Christianity can be taken in that direction as well. Kasi because you're always historicizing and you're always questioning the orthodoxy, the orthodox claims of the say Catholicism, Roman Catholicism.
A historical Orthodox, right? Ahistorical, right? Exactly. Don't completely taken out of its historical. I mean, one thing, like for instance, with works of Karen Armstrong, is that she keeps on emphasizing that back in the days, this was all oral tradition. Right? Most people were not literate back in the day. So it was really about the prophetic tradition, the lyricism, the poetry, the cadence, right? That is what captured people's imagination. Not that people will sit down and analyze line by line and then, that Talmudic approach. The Talmudic approach was really within a very specific, right, class of people in the Jewish tradition. But majority of religious conversion was done with this prophetic moments, right? You go in the middle of a agora and make this speech, etc. So it was not really that textual, and that's what we tend to forget from a much more orthodox point of view. I don't know, is that a liberal Christianity understanding approach, would you say, if I make that argument? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the very shape of liberal Christianity, you find it in its advocacies, in its advocacy. So it's less rigid when it comes to, or it's definitely not rigid at all when it comes to um, divorce and family life and social order. It celebrates gender equality.
Right.
Again, I keep repeating these ideas because that's how you really discern
Yun
the
yung
liberalism.
markers, no? Yun yung markers.
Yeah, those are the
Dun mo
cultural
makikita. And are there organizations, individuals who are now the major advocates of liberal Christianity that we have to keep in mind?
Definitely. And in North America, you'll find the divisions between among the Methodist churches or the Presbyterian churches, right? So there, at one point, certain denominations, Episcopalian, the Episcopalian Church in the U.S. Is very progressive. About a decade or so ago, they ordained an openly gay bishop, for example, in a clear affront, to the norms of conservative Christians there, and then that led, I think, to the division within the denomination. But that's, of course, classic Protestantism. Every time you don't agree with the other person, you create your own.
What about Pope Francis? Some of the statements he has made that seem to be far more progressive than the more traditional Vatican positions.
Yeah.
Of course, I know there are back and forth, but anyways, at least there were moments of pushing a little bit the boundaries of discussion, right? Like, who am I to judge if, let's say, you're homosexual? Yung mga moments na yan, right? I mean, they created a lot of debate among more conservative Catholics. That's what I'm absolutely sure about. I heard a lot of them, hand wringing. Yeah.
In fact, with respect to Pope Francis, I am less interested in the position of Pope Francis than in the reception that people have.
Exactly. Yeah. Makes
right.
Sense.
So Cornelio, who am I to judge? That was really very specific and without any.
It's not an airplane, right? When he was about to take off or something.
Without any elaborate theological discussion about gender, diba? Of course, later on, Pope Francis states that, okay, I am a man of the church, and therefore I have to stand by the teachings of the church and so forth, right? But of course, that's to be expected because he is the Pope, right? But I am not interested in that. I am more interested in how people received it. They even came up with shirts. Dito sa Pilipinas, meron tayong mga shirt na who am I to judge, o mga ganyan, right? Using the quotes of the man to be their own source of spiritual inspiration. And this, I think, is the beauty of religion, right? What is meant to be conservative becomes liberal when it's received by other people, or the other way around. No? Kaya, again, going back to my earlier point, I really feel that studying religion at this point in time in the Philippines, with respect to young people, with respect to generational change, with respect to politics, this is an exciting time to do all of that because we see that there are cracks now. Cracks are beginning to show, and it would be nice to keep documenting them and see which moment leads to what.
Mark, do you have a question before we go towards the end of this almost 2 hours discussion now? Mark, do you have a question? Okay ka ba dyan? Sorry, Mark, kanina may dumaan lang sa likod mo. It's like, I'm trying to control myself. It's like, naku, baka ano mangyayari dyan
roommate
bigla.
Louie. Hi ka, Louie.
Kamusta? Pasensya na, bro. Nabigla lang ako eh. Nabigla lang ako eh. Sorry. Pati si Jayeel din kasi nag-react eh. Sorry po. Sorry talaga. Si Jayeel kasi nag-react na biglang ako hindi na makontrol. Like, oh my Lord, wait lang. Sorry, Lord. Stop the react. Let's go move forward. Love na love ka namin, Mark. Thank you so much for this discussion. Now, Jayeel, let me try to end on this point. No, of course, Mark can make some final also additions and all on this issue later on. Yung what I've called Singapore envy. It seems to be a very powerful element in Philippines now. And you, as someone who studies here, like you can see that this whole discipline, this whole community, etc. It all sounds so Lee Kuan Yew to me, 80s and 90s, right? And you see a lot of people are making this argument, are new middle-class Filipinos who can afford to go to Singapore, some of our neighboring countries now, more prosperous but less democratic, right? I mean, how do you approach that as someone who spent a lot of time in Singapore and you're I'm absolutely sure you're very familiar with this among our OFWs especially, right? Kasi sila, ganito, strict sila, ganun, kahit maunlat sila, ganun. And look at it, all our politicians want to be Lee Kuan Yew, right? Duterte saying, sila yung parang Singapore of Mindanao, whatever. And then Cayetano, of course, saying we will be in Singapore. And then si Marcos saying, if hindi nyo pinalis yung tatay ko, di sana naging Singapore tayo. Never mind that Lee Kuan Yew said, oh my goodness, this guy pillaged your country and you're still gonna. And then ngayon, beto si Isko Moreno, tinanong ko, sino ba pinaka-idol mo, Yorme? Si Lee Kuan Yew. Talaga, I was expecting him to say, I don't know, Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln, etc., which he said later on. So it's like everyone is saying like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore and all. And one of the guys who really made me pay attention to this is Slavoj Žižek, right? He said like in hundreds years from now, if they're going to make a statue to a person, it will be Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew, because he's the one who proved that you can have close politics but open capitalism and kind of make it work, right? And he influenced Deng Xiaoping, China, a lot of countries who are copying Singapore. United Arab Emirates essentially studied and replicated Singapore in the Persian Gulf region, right? Anyways, let's go back to this, because I think this is where there's a morality, there's a politics aspect, there's the envy aspect, there's the class aspect. And I just want to take your stance, not only as a sociologist, but someone who spent a lot of time in Singapore.
Okay. Let me answer that first as a human being, as a person who's lived in Singapore. I'm a Filipino who lived in Singapore for 7 years and can really understand. I think, I'd like to think that I can understand the Filipino sensibility in Singapore. I can sympathize. I do not agree, but I can sympathize.
Yeah, of course.
Bakit? Kasi the moment that you land at Changi Airport, you readily see the difference, eh? And then you drive out, diba, the trees and the well-manicured roads and the environment. Everything is perfect, no? Everything that we are not, Singapore is. And so mapapaisip ang isang Pilipino, sasabihin niya, ano nangyari sa bansa natin?
Yeah.
Right? So I can sympathize. Eh? I think whenever Filipinos aspire to becoming like Singapore or Doha or Dubai or whatever.
Right? Asiano din sila, di ba? I mean, it's easier to relate to Singapore na katabi natin than, let's say, Arabs, right? For instance, who have oil and all of that. Wala namang oil ang Singapore. I mean, that's the thing, eh. Singapore doesn't even have resources, right?
And it was a backwater back in the 1960s, 1970s, no? But anyway, economic backwater. So
that's actually not true. They were the Gibraltar of Asia, a major British port, but that's the Lee Kuan Yew propaganda. We used to be mosquito infested, and I made it first world. But never mind the problem. But anyways, going back to that, I'm just saying why Singapore envy. I didn't call it rich envy or Emirati envy, right? Now you go to the Middle East, yes. Some countries are envious of Emirates because they're the same region and all. Like they were like camel riders 50 years ago. Now they have one city every day or something like that. But anyways, let's go back to Singapore envy. I want to hear from you.
Yeah. So I can sympathize for the simple reason na I think Filipinos are simply disappointed. No? So from an emotional perspective, from an emotional point of view, I can understand. And I can also understand why many Filipinos who decide to become permanent residents or even Singaporean citizens, I can understand why. And I have no judgments. I tried talking to them and, using the nationalistic card or the patriotism card. No, wala eh. Oo, wala. I mean, of course, sasabihin nila, Pilipino pa rin naman kami. Pero minahal namin ang bansa, pero minahal pa kami ng bansa. Diba? So pag gano'n na yung statement, parang how do you contest that, right? I mean,
unrequited love.
Exactly. No, unrequited love. So I can sympathize. I do not agree, but I can sympathize. Pero if we are critical about this, Richard and Mark, I think it also reeks of authoritarian nostalgia. It does, no? It really does. Aanhin naman natin ang press freedom, which Singapore doesn't have, kung wala naman tayong kakainin sa lamesa. Ang mga Pilipino, masyado tayong democratic. I mean, whatever that means, but it's a kind of rhetoric that you hear, di ba? No? Masyado tayong ma-complain, no? Masyado tayong nagwewelga. Sa Singapore, bawal yon, right? Sa Singapore nga, bubble gum nga lang eh. I exaggerated yun. Bubble gum nga lang, bawal nguyain. Actually, pwede, bawal lang magbenta. Pero anyway, it's exaggerated in that sense, just to show na, sa Singapore may willpower, may political will ang government. Sa Pilipinas, wala. Yeah. exactly the cult of political will, which is essentially, right, unravel all of that, unpack all of that, and then what do you have? It's authoritarian nostalgia. So people like Ping Lacson, from Ping Lacson to Bongbong Marcos, right, they can appeal to that and say na, we can be a glorious country. Make the Philippines great again, right? Assuming that we were great, in the time of Ferdinand Marcos. That is why I think we need to be very careful whenever we compare ourselves to Singapore. Singapore is a great country. I consider it my second home, but their society is paying the price for all of this economic growth. And for my postdoc, I conducted research among young adult Singaporeans and realized that many of these younger people are increasingly questioning, right, the merits of a strongman rule, or having only a one party governing the country, where alternative opinions, critical thought is rejected in the name of Asian values, whatever that means. Essentially, it's really communitarian philosophy, communitarian ideologies, rather, and so forth. That needs to be unpacked. But again, unpacking all of that takes a lot of time and a lot of critical thinking that we should foster among our people from the time that they are in elementary up until now, right? Obviously. But it's really at its core authoritarian nostalgia, and we need to expose it and why it's wrong, and whether we can still aspire to to greatness without abandoning the freedoms that Filipinos 100 years ago, Filipinos decades ago fought for with their own lives.
Maraming salamat. I know you had a moment there kasi pagod na tayong lahat. Oh my God, I think 2 hours and 50 minutes. It was a very long day for some of us. It started from last night. Mark, I'm very proud of you. I owe you 2 Starbucks. Mark, you're a hero, man. Man, you're here. I mean, I really want to thank Jayeel, but I want to really thank also Mark. No, I mean, God bless the Philippines. God bless all of us. We care to have this conversation. It was very intimate, spiritual conversation. Not something you can always say, right? Nowadays. So, maraming salamat. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jayeel.
Jayeel.
I know. I hope this is just the beginning. Hopefully, in the future, we can have in-person conversations and studio a la Joe Rogan style. But for now, we did it over Zoom. I don't know how many calories you burned by just standing up all the time. Na-stress ako just watching you. Is he okay? Like, ako yung paa mo, yung mga, alam mo na, diba? Baka mo yung mga varicose vein na. Sorry na. Diba? At Mark, before dumadami pa yung mga kasama mo dyan, siguro, matulog ka na, diba? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jayeel. Do you have some final thoughts you want to share? I mean, to students, people who want to get into probably sociology or continue your line of research, want to know about religious study. I mean, sorry, sociology of religion and related lines of inquiry.
Mga kabataan who are interested in the social sciences and understanding why our nation, why our country is like this, I think you should consider sociology. Sociology is also a very useful discipline, not only in understanding our society, but also in implementing change. Because we understand, the reasons why people behave in this way or that way. Through sociology, you can pursue a career in politics or in research or in
blogger. You can be a blogger. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Be a vlogger also, or be a development worker. Making a positive change in our society. So siguro yan. We've covered a lot of things in this podcast, but kung merong big takeaway doon, I hope na appreciate nyo yung value ng sociological perspective. Reach out to me, by the way, if you would like to process some of your thoughts. Thank you.
Associate din yung pitch niya. Welcome to Ateneo to Manila. Okay yun. Mahusay. I'll give 10 out of 10. Enrollment na eh. Go. Maraming salamat. Thank you so much. God bless. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Probably this has been our longest I record, I think it's 2 hours and 12 minutes. Sorry, wala na. Talo na si Lord De Vera. Meron tayong bagong record with Attorney Starr kasi disqualification cases. Ang complicated ng batas eh. Nakakahilo, di ba? Pero today, my goodness, ang pinag-usapan namin, spirituality.
Religion, spiritual.
You cannot get closer to someone's heart, right? They always say don't talk about two things, politics and religion. Guess what? We talk about both of them at the same time and their interrelationship in the most respectable and intimate and vulnerable way possible. So thank you so much, Jayeel, for making this possible. Please, magpahinga ka na, Associate Dean, and thank you for that good pitch. Definitely hope to catch up with you in person soon. Thanks also, Mark. God bless you. Have a wonderful campaign period, and hopefully we can have another episode together also to break down yung latest sa ating elections. God bless. Project Pilipinas, ito yung latest episode namin. Thank you very much. God bless.